We're back. It's January, the year before a presidential election, and no major Republican candidate has declared his or her candidacy. What are these GOPers waiting for? Do they think President Obama might be too hard to beat? Well, let's bring in my colleague, Joe Scarborough, host of Morning Joe. Joe, what a morning you give us on my treadmill. What a morning. I mean, it is so full of personality and excitement. If you're alone in the world, you got company early in the morning. It's a great thing. It's a real institution, I must say.
Thank you.
And it's a young one that you created. So let's talk about, you created something in this business. Let me ask you about the party, because I read your comment. I don't know how you find time to write a column as well, but you write this column for Politico, which is a pretty hot sheet. And I caught the line about inside, and you get on the phone with some people, and they say he's tougher to beat than people say he is, the president. Right. And that could be the reason why the slow-mo opening here.
Right. 4 years, as you know, 4 years ago, when you talked about it last week, Barack Obama was already out campaigning. No major Republicans announced yet. And in the end, there are a lot of different reasons for that, as I explained in the article. The primary process is not as compressed. It's not as early in 12 as it was in 08. But the bottom line has to do with the fact that right now, privately, a lot of mainstream candidates that could actually win the nomination are simply afraid that Barack Obama is going to be too difficult to beat. And this really went back before his poll numbers shot up to 50%. I was hearing this a month and a half ago after the election when they said he's going to move to the center. And if his numbers are at 50%, when you've got real unemployment over 10%, imagine what happens when that drops down to 8.5%.
That's the way I was thinking. How do you get 10% unemployment and a 50% approval rate? That ratio doesn't make any sense.
It's stunning. I mean, you saw what happened to Ronald Reagan, who came in. It was extraordinarily popular in 1981. In 1982, he got thrashed because unemployment rose over 10%. And his numbers didn't really start rising until the unemployment numbers went down. Barack Obama, right now, mathematically has a winning formula. You look at the fact, and you know this, that in off-year elections, and we said it all last year, the voters are older and they're whiter. In presidential years, they are younger and they are less white. And as long as President Obama is getting 95, 96% of the African-American vote, 75% of the Hispanic vote, he has the progressive base locked down regardless of who's running against him. That puts him at 48, 49%.
Well, let's take a look at this new poll, because I want to know what you think of the lineup. Maybe the lineup has something to do with this. I sometimes think we're overheated by watching or hearing about what Fox puts on and maybe Rush Limbaugh on some of the right-wing radio, because we get the sense that these people are larger-than-life figures. Nate Silver at the New York Times has put together this little bit of information. It's a survey. When you look back to this time in the campaign for president 8 years ago, actually 11 years ago, George W. Bush and Elizabeth Dole were overwhelmingly seen with net favorability nationwide. The same goes for 2008. Look, I mean, I was always pushing because I was looking at these numbers. Rudy Giuliani, John McCain, they had huge favorable ratings, net, positive over negative. But you look at it today, and all the candidates that are running, only two really have net positive. That's, of course, Romney and Huckabee. And all the others seem to have net or zero favorability, unfavorability. I don't know. You know, I'm kind of shocked when I see that Palin's down at negative 23. I'm not sure what that does in primaries or caucuses, but that's a hell of a negative thing to overcome. Are they thinking that they don't want to run against this headwind?
We live, I mean, those of us that work in the media and people that love politics, that watch your show all the time and watch my show all the time, sometimes we might get disconnected from mainstream Republican voters. And I was just having this conversation before with somebody that said mainstream Republican voters, and I know this, the people that elect candidates, they don't, most of them don't sit and watch cable news at night. Most of them don't listen to talk radio in the afternoon. Chris, you know them. I mean, most of them are guys, or like my dad, that that came from a blue-collar family. They were the first to go to college in their family. They became middle class. They work hard all day. They come home, and they're watching football. They're not talking politics. They're watching their kids do their homework. They're not screaming about what Glenn Beck or Joe Scarborough was talking about earlier in the day. They are focused on getting their family ahead. Those are the people that swing elections, and just bluntly, they don't look at somebody like Sarah Palin as a serious candidate, and Newt Gingrich has too much scar tissue. That's why I think in the end, if somebody like Chris Christie doesn't run, I think you have Mitt Romney winning by default. I think it'll be very ugly, but a guy like Mitt Romney wins.
Let's take a look at the poll to back up what you just said. This is the WMUR poll, the famous local affiliate up there in New Hampshire. And I'm looking at these numbers. It's Romney at 40, and then Giuliani, who has done nothing except say he might be interested at 10, which shows he's got endurance up there. I always thought he had a lot of appeal to moderate Republicans. Tough law and order guy, obviously cleaned up New York. In a lot of ways, people like him. He's difficult to deal with, maybe, but I like him. Anyway, Pawlenty at 7, Huckabee at 7. Then you got Newt at 6, and Palin down there as well at 6. It's interesting that Palin gets all the ink. Giuliani, Pawlenty doesn't get any.
Yeah, Pawlenty, if I were Pawlenty, I would be pleased at that 7%. Romney, you've heard it. I wrote about it in the article. Everybody talks about it. His support's a mile wide and an inch deep. But in 2012, that may be enough. It really may. I keep going back to the one name that was not on that list, and the one name that I hear everybody talking about, whether it's Republicans in the Northeast or South Carolina Tea Party members, or you heard Ann Coulter talk about it even, Chris Christie. Everybody's waiting for Chris Christie to jump in the race. This is a man who sees the moment. What he's done in New Jersey's influenced Andrew Cuomo in New York, who now sits with like a 77% approval rating. Christie's doing well. And so the question is, will somebody like Chris Christie jump in? If he does not,
it tells you what the Republicans want. They want an executive who cuts spending, who does it, who doesn't just talk about it. Let's take a look at this, Joe. We don't have a little time here. Jonathan Martin, of course, and Ben Smith wrote a Politico about Palin's lack of support in Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina, the big three of the early states. And all three states, Republican operatives and political pollsters repeated one word: serious. The states take their early responsibilities seriously, they said, and they don't see Palin with her shortened term as governor, her penchant for public snits, and her reality show as a serious candidate. You know, people wear out their welcome in American politics, and I'm not going to be too fast on this, but I do think we talk about her too much. I think Palin may be like a fan belt on your car. You know how a fan belt wears out and you have to get a new one? It just wears out, and you get a new one. Is she a fan belt that's just been thrown? Is she off the top? When I see 6% with all the publicity she's got in the last 2 years, explain.
I think you look at her statements. She certainly didn't help herself following the Gabby Giffords shooting. Not that she was responsible for it, but her response sounded self-interested when everybody else was talking about this woman, and when they were burying a third-grade girl, she was going on Facebook talking about herself. I think that was a turning point. But also, it seems like everything she says seems to always involve a fight. She just hasn't had the political operatives around her that could say, you need to have a positive message. How are you going to project yourself? And I do think at this point, she's put herself in a terrible position politically. I think most Republicans I talked to that felt sorry for her in 2008, thought the media was unfair to her in 2008, have now just sort of shook their heads and moved on and said she is not serious enough to be president of the United States. And I think that's why you see the numbers dropping. And I suspect, like Newt Gingrich, the scar tissue has already gotten is too severe for him. I just don't think that they can win the nomination.
Where do you think you are right now? I think you're sort of center right. I'd say you're about 2/3 of the way over, not all the way over. Where would you put yourself?
Well, it's
I get talking to you. I think you're not far right. Certainly, you're not a liberal. You're not what I call moderate, which is sort of milquetoast.
Well, Chris, it's fascinating. You've known me since 1994. I went on Hardball all the time in 95, 96, 97, and I was saying the same thing then that I'm saying now. I don't think if you want to just talk about where the Republican Party is economically, I don't think they're conservative enough. They're talking about slashing 12% of the budget, but they're not talking about Social Security.
12%. They're not touching 12%. They're not slashing 12%.
Touching 12%. Yeah. So I'm telling them you need to cut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, Pentagon spending, get out of Afghanistan, do all of these things that would help us get out of this debt crisis. And yet my Republican Party, just like they did during the Bush era, is not stepping forward and making those courageous cuts right now. So I don't know. I mean, it used to be that that position would make me more conservative than where establishment Republicans are in Washington, D.C. But I guess since I don't run around talking about where the president was born, and because I say that he's a Christian because he says he's a Christian, I suppose that's the new measuring stick for what makes you conservative. I guess these days, for a lot of people online and on cable TV, you've got to actually hate the president, or else. No, I'm dead serious, Chris.
I'm laughing because of the truth of what you say.
I'm dead serious. It has nothing to do with ideology anymore, because I'm more ideologically conservative on budget matters than anybody I know on Capitol Hill, other than Rand Paul, Ron Paul, and a handful of people. But because I don't hate the president, because I think he's a good man, and I think he's a good father, and I just disagree with his policies, I guess by 2011 standards, that makes me a liberal. I don't get it.
It makes you a great colleague.
It has more to do with personality than it does with what you believe, and I think that's sad and pathetic, and that's why the Republican Party is where it is right now.
Morning Joe, you built this place.
Like in the morning.
Mo Green, he built this place. There's not a monument to this guy. There's not a sign.
Yes.
He built this place. Joe Scarborough, Morning Joe.
Thank you, Chris.
Great creation. Thanks for coming on tonight.
I greatly appreciate you having me.